let's take into account Peter BLAU. See, Peter BLAU, similarly, he conducted studies, and in his studies he found out that the compliance towards the laws, rules and regulation within the Weberian bureaucracy, as it is emphasized by Weber, is not necessarily true. So in reality, not necessarily people in this Weberian system of administration, they conform to the laws, rules and regulations. Many a time they tend to violate, and there are dysfunctional consequences or even unintended consequences, and in this unintended consequences, certain consequences are dysfunctional. See, he studied he studied a placement agency, basically an agency that is helping the unemployed to get employed, a state employment agency. And another, he studied one of the federal agency that is responsible for taking note of the financial accounting of the corporates. So one, state employment agency, another, a federal agency that is taking note of the financial accounting of corporates. Now see, with regard to the first one, in the state employment agency, the receptionist has to first of all take note of the resume of the job seekers, and while receiving the resume will interact with the applicant, find out their suitability or employability, and accordingly will forward their application for the interview. An interviewer will interview the person and find out suitably in which particular segment or the sector or function or the job that individual is suitable, and accordingly will place. So this was the requirement, this is the arrangement. But in his study he found out the receptionist is irrespective of the employability of the applicant, is placing the application for the interview at an earlier date, because the requirement is that as per the employability, she should actually place for the interview. So if people have higher chances of getting employed, interviews should be at an earlier date, and if the possibility of employability is actually comparatively less or limited, the placement should be somewhat, interview should be somewhat later or as and when that actually comes up. But see here, the receptionist is not going by the norm as it is prescribed under the organizational rule book. Rather, what she is doing? She is placing most of these people for the interview at an earlier date. Why? As Peter BLAU found out that in reality, since people are actually having face-to-face interaction the receptionists are not, they are avoiding unpleasant situation. They are not trying to actually communicate to the people that your employability is low. So there is some human consideration is here, because of which they in fact are placing individuals for interview at an earlier date. In fact, placing these individuals on an earlier date is overburdening the interviewers. But even if the interviewers are overburdened, still they are not actually objecting to that, because see, there are many interviewers, and these interviewers are competing with each other for their performance evaluation or performance rating. So the interviewer who is able to place more number of people, that is a statistical counting, is rated as high as compared to others. So that is why even if they are being overburdened, they are not actually objecting to that, because more number of interviews will enable them to place more. And see, if you take, Peter BLAU also observed that these interviewers, irrespective of their accuracy of employability, they are very lax. They are trying to simply, their effort is to place the individual to help them get employment anywhere, anyhow. So they are not actually complying to the requirement of the organization that first of all they have to test the employability, their suitability, accordingly they have to place. But they, irrespective of their employability or their suitability, they are trying to push them into employment in some sort, by any way, by any means. Even though those people who are placed into the job, they again come back to seek the job after, let's say, the probationary period. So here, if you take into account, let's say, the interviewers, or for that matter the role of the receptionist, so they are not complying to the laws, rules and regulation within the organization. They are not sticking to the laws, rules and regulation, and this is resulting into something, what you can say, the unintended consequence. Unintended consequences: interviewers being highly overburdened, and interviewers placing individuals not necessarily considering their employability, and people who are getting employed, they're again coming back after the probationary period, that means that the initial training period or temporary period, they're coming back. So this is an unintended consequence. This is a dysfunctional consequence, and this is actually happening because people are not following the laws or norms within the organization. So Peter BLAU highlights that within the organization, because of certain human consideration, because of certain symbolic nature of the interaction, symbolic, because I don't want to communicate something wrong to you, I don't want to make you feel bad. In my gesture, in my action, I do not want to communicate that we are unhelpful. So Peter BLAU is highlighting that within the organization, within the Weberian bureaucracy, because of the symbolic nature of the function, they are not complying to the laws, rules and regulation, as a result of which there is unintended consequences. And this unintended consequences that is there because of this symbolic behavior, this unintended consequence is basically unintended because the interviewers are being overburdened, and the receptionist, they're not are not actually categorizing or finalizing the employability nicely. The interviewers are not evaluating their employability nicely, placing them anywhere it is possible for a good rating, and ultimately they are not properly employed. They come back again and they go through the process again. This is unintended, this is dysfunctional, and this is primarily moreover because there is no compliance towards laws, rules and regulation. And this lack of compliance is moreover because the symbolic nature of the behavior of the individuals within the organization. The same he also found out when he took up another organization for its study that we are referring, a federal agency that is investigating, that is into the financial accounting of the corporates. Say, if you take into account this particular study of Peter BLAU, he found out that in this, the agents of the or the officers of the federal agency of the US, they were inquiring, investigating the financial accounts of the corporates. And since it is very complex, it is a very complicated matter on many accounts, on many cases, they are not very clear, they have confusion. And when they have confusion, they need to clarify it from the superior or the supervisor. But most of the time, they do not go to the supervisor for the clarification. They in fact ask other agents. That means other officers or other colleagues, their own colleague, they ask about that problem, and wherever possible, they try to find solution through their colleague or friend instead of going to the supervisor. And why they don't go to the supervisor? One, it takes more time, a practical thing. Colleague, physical proximity, no, it is easy to interact, you get a solution. Second, if you go to the superior, they believe that this particular officer is not very highly skilled. That will give a low rating. So that is why they, in fact, instead of going to the superior, they ask their colleague. So Peter BLAU is highlighting one important aspect here. You see, if you take into account these functionaries, unlike what Weber is saying, they do not comply to laws, rules and regulations. They do not comply to the very standards of behavior within the organization. And in fact, in order to safeguard their private interest, primarily they are safeguarding their private interest. The interviewers, in order to have high rating, they are trying to place anywhere. These agents, in order to avoid a bad performance rating from the superior or low rating from the superior, they are not consulting the superior. So their private interest. So in order to maximize their private interest, they are not complying to the rule, but ultimately they are justifying this behavior on the basis of organizational goal. So they justify, it's good for the organization, it's good for the requirement of the goal of the organization. But whatever that might be, Peter BLAU is highlighting that if you take into account organizations, not necessarily individuals comply to this organizational norms, organizational rules or regulations. Many a time they do not comply to these rules and regulations, and the non-compliance of these rules and regulation results also in unintended consequences, many a time into dysfunctional consequences.